Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. I'm Irfan Hussain, and I am here with you people today with the topic of short story. We are going to study short stories both in Russian literature and American literature and in the literature of war and conflict. So that will work for both the papers of Russian literature right now and the paper of war and conflict. Let us start with history of short story, and we have to understand the four stages of short stories development. First, it started in ancient time with the oral storytelling. Then we come to medieval written story collection. Then birth of the modern short story in the 19th century. Then short story in the modern era. Let us discuss all these stages one by one. In ancient times, people told short narratives orally for entertainment, moral lessons, and cultural transmission. So, see, these were the narratives, maybe in the form of prose, maybe in the form of poetry. Mostly, the short narratives were written in the poetic form because that was the most popular, and poetry has always been considered the elite genre of literature. The purpose was to entertain people, and while entertaining them, also to inculcate, to impart some kind of moral lesson as well, and then definitely the cultural transmission. These stories were brief and focused, which makes them similar to the modern short story. Why we start from here? Because this is one of the characteristics of the short story, that the theme is focused, a single theme, a single plot, and a single character is focused. And it used to be practiced in that oral storytelling tradition. A few examples are of Aesop's fables that were written in 16th century before Christ, very short moral tales. You might have read many of these. For example, you must have read the story of Hare and the Tortoise, Fox and the Grapes, Thirsty Crow. All these stories were in fact the part of the collection of these Aesop's fables. Then uh, Pentantentra, that was a collection by Pentantentra around 200 to 300 before Christ, and it was written by a Hindu or Aryan uh, religious scholar, and the purpose of the story writing or storytelling was to impart a religious education and at the same time to train the people, to give them social education, to groom them according to their religion and culture. Then the big name 1001 Nights, that is also known as Alif Lalvi Hazar Dastan, collection of entertaining tales told by Shahrazad. It was first translated into English in 1915 by Richard Burton, and these were interesting stories, definitely not the children's stories, but have always been popular throughout the history of literature. So these were the ancient stories that were in fact created in the form of oral storytelling, because there was not a culture or tradition of writing. And then we come next to medieval time, when the stories were collected in the written form. I mentioned Canterbury Tales, and you may be surprised with this name, Canterbury Tales, because we all know that Canterbury Tales were written by Geoffrey Chaucer in the 14th century, and these were the poetic collections. So let me read it and then I will explain it. Most of the tales are written in verse, poetic form, especially rhyming couplets, and you all already know what is a Chaucerian stanza, and I need not to discuss all these things here right now. However, a few sections, or rather only the two sections, the tale of Balibi and the Parson's Tale, are written in prose. So these were the two stories told by two different characters, and these were in the prose form. And this question has been given in the public service exams and other one paper exams. Which one which stories have been written in the prose form in contemporary tales. So these are these two stories. Why we write it in the development stages of short story? Because these were the short narratives, and these were also a kind of the frame stories, a story within stories, and all of these stories focused in the poetic form definitely mostly on the single plot, on single character. So these were the in fact the characteristics of short story and short narration. That is why we can say that it was a kind of development of such kind of narration that focused on a linear single plot. Then came Decameron, that was written by Giovanni Boccaccio. We will read it Boccaccio because he was an Italian writer around 1353. Unlike the contemporary tales, the Decameron is written mostly in prose, not poetry. It contains 100 prose narratives told by 10 young people escaping the plague. Uh, we might have read a few stories in different collection of child stories if you ever have interaction with these kind of stories. I'm not going into detail, but that was also a kind of a contribution towards the development of the short story. And then the birth of the modern short story, the short story that we know now, that was the modern short story developed in the 19th century, especially in the United States and Europe. You know, the United States uh, created literature, but it was the short story that was especially developed in America. And there was definitely French masters like Guy de Maupassant and Alexander Dumas who wrote short stories, and there were many others as well. And there was short story writers in England as well. So important writers include Edgar Allan Poe established the story that a short story should be read, established theory that short story should be read in one sitting and create a single emotional effect. And we know Edgar Allan Poe for his writing style, for his psychological insights, for his Gothic style of writing, and some other characteristics as well. And then Hodon wrote symbolic and modern short stories. And then Nikolai Gogol, definitely not from Europe or America, a great Russian master. And we are going to study his two stories, uh, The Nose and Overcoat. Then Chekhov, we are going to study his play in our course in Operation Literature. Then O. Henry, famous for twist ending, and this period is considered the true beginning of the short story as modern literary genre. And then short story in the modern era, as the new topics, new um, movements arised in that modern era, so the short story took a new twist as well. And in the 19th, sorry, in the 20th century, the short story became very popular in literary magazines and journals. Development of the magazine and tradition of the magazine and journals encouraged a lot of writers to write short stories. As we see in the modern time, as in digests like Readers or do digests like Suspense, Shwa, Khawateen, and in Akhbar-e-Jahan and other magazines, there are always published short stories. And the readers who are in habit of reading these things, they are encouraged to write themselves to uh, encouraged to write short stories or short narrations. They can develop in various forms, like in science fiction, like personal experiences, and many other things. And that tradition of magazines and journals encouraged a lot of writers who wrote, and definitely it developed the genre of short stories because it could inculcate the short stories in the limited space of the journals and magazines. Also, novels were published in many magazines or journals, but these were published in the form of episodes. There are very big names that were published in the form of episodes like Tale of Two Cities and many others. Major writers of that time were James Joyce, Catherine Mansfield, Ernest Hemingway, and there are many others as well. Now let us move towards the literary elements of short story. The short story, the only genre developed in America, as I already have told you, is a brief fictional work because it is meant to be read in one sitting. It usually centers upon one main character and his conflict, rather than having multiple main plots as novels do. Writing a good short story requires great skill because it must accomplish its purpose in very few words. You may be confused with the last phrase, very few words, when you come across the stories of Sherman Alexie or yeah, in some other stories that go near to the length of a novella, novelet. Because that's the modern tradition now, the stories are being written in some extended forms. But this is still, we can say that far uh, lesser in the volume than the novels. Setting of the story is important as the setting of is important in drama, in novel, and any genre of literature. Setting consists of two elements. One is time, and other is place. Or when the story is set, and at which place the story is being set. Point of view, that is important. This question has been given in the publicist exams many times, and we need to understand what is the point of view, author's choice of narrator. It may be first person, a character in a story who can reveal only his or her own feelings and thoughts. So, for example, the writer is writing a story of himself. For example, I am writing my story and I use the first person, or the writer is writing and he comes into the shoes of the narrator and he writes I went, I do, and I did, and in this is how he expresses himself in the story as first person. Third person, objective. If the word objective is to be considered, the narrator can only relate what he sees, hears, feels, and touches or smells. It is like looking through a window on the screen. So narrator is observing and he is giving his views, but he is not inculcating his own opinion, his own feelings, or his own emotions. And on the other hand, the third person, omniscient, the word omniscient is to be considered here. The narrator knows everything about the characters and can enter their minds and know their thoughts and feelings. So see, the writer expresses, describes the emotions and feelings of the writers, even his inner thoughts, even his psychological traumas. And it is just like that, he is inside the brain of the writer. So this is called the third person omniscient point of view. Plot, we have studied plot in Oedipus, in other plays, we have studied plots in the novels like Pride and Prejudice. And so you already know that's a series of related events that make up story of drama. In plot triangle, we already have discussed many times exposition, setting and initial incidents, rising action, the story events after the exposition that build suspense and interest. Then there come climax, high point of suspense or interest, the point at which the plot changes direction. Then the falling action, denouement, the unraveling events of the climax, and then resolution, the state of events, the end of the story. So basically, this triangle has three main points. One is the rise of action, then the climax, and then the fall of action. And this rise of action is further divided into two parts, and then the fall of action is also further divided into two parts of D and E. Characterization, the method of the author uses to develop the personality of the person in a story. Personality is the way people think, feel, and act. The author may do this by indirect or direct. In indirect, author make them, the writers, to do some action, make them to speak something, and he leaves the judgment on the reader or on the audience to judge the character and the personality of the character. While in that is direct characterization, writer develops a character and tells himself about the character. We see that George Bernard Shaw, G.B. Shaw, he writes very long prefaces to his plays because he always tries to explain the characters and the themes and the plots himself. that so that the reader could understand his motives. So it may be sometime in this way that the writer gives a direct description of the characters, but most of the time this is always indirect. Most of the time, I say indirect description, and we judge the character and their personality through their actions. Conflict is the core of literature. If someone is asked what is the core of drama, we always say that it is conflict. The struggle between opposing forces in a story that makes the plot interesting and suspenseful. There are two kinds of external kinds, external and internal. We know that the external conflict is man versus man. It may be man versus nature. It may be man versus fate. It may be man versus society. It may be man versus gods, as it was in Oedipus Rex. And then the internal conflict that was first introduced by Christopher Marlowe, and that is man versus himself. When man suffers from some inner conflict, as we see in Dr. Foster's, that he is always suffering from inner conflict and is hovering between good and bad throughout the play. Then the protagonist is the main character. We don't always call it a hero. So protagonist is not always a hero because hero is always associated with good qualities. While protagonist can be good or evil. As I personally never think that Macbeth was the hero of the play because he chose evil himself. He was not forced towards evil as Oedipus was forced towards evil. And there's always a big debate about the hero or the protagonist of the Paradise Lost by Milton. And it is concluded that Milton uh, represented or Milton painted Saturn as the protagonist of the uh, epic. And Saturn was not a good character, he was an evil character. So protagonist could be evil or good, both. Antagonist is a character or force opposing the protagonist and creating conflict in the plot. Character that is always an opposing force that puts pressure on hero and that always work as an, an opponent or opposing force to the main character of the narration or drama or play, whatever it is. Then there came mood, the atmosphere created by the author through setting, imagery, details, and descriptions. The mood may be sad, maybe scary, maybe funny, maybe romantic, maybe horrible. It could be anything. A wonderful technique, the use of clues in a story to suggest the story's outcome, what may happen next. So that is foreshadowing, and we will study this foreshadowing in our stories, and you will study in other papers as well. Inference, the conclusion that drawing conclusion or making assumptions based on limited information. I am not going into details of these things because you already have studied these things, and we will definitely discuss while studying our course. Symbolism, we know that there's one of the vital elements of literature. Rose may present love, skull may present danger, and an eagle, as we say, can be the symbol of freedom, symbol of brave nature, and symbol of warrior, as we always call the Air Force of Pakistan as Pakistani Shaheens. Stereotypes, we know that there are beliefs that are just believed because of they are being believed. Lived in. Like people who wear glasses are very smart, or like all boys like to play sports, maybe stereotypes. There may be a few boys who, rather many of you, do not like to play sports. You would like to spend more times on your screens. And there is a very famous stereotype that women speak more than men. I don't know whether it's correct or not, but it is a stereotype. Irony, we know that the disparity between the reality and the appearance, it may be verbal irony, situational irony, dramatic irony. You must have studied this in Oedipus Rex, in Pride and Prejudice, and many other works as well. Theme, the central idea and message or insight into life revealed through the story. Thank you very much. This is all for today, and we will now come with our next topics, inshallah, very soon. Thanks a lot for your patience for listening.